Now, because all things commerce were created through the Vatican, when you assign your consent, you need to assign it to something. So what is it that you're assigning your consent to? People have said, oh, we're going to be assigning our consent to somebody else and they're going to give away their rights to the house, for example. So what people need to understand, first of all, is when you use a legal fiction, a capitalised name that's copyrighted by the Crown Corporation, you are giving away all of your rights. So you're saying that you agree to be a thing, a commodity, and you agree to be subject to all of the legislation that's written by the country or state. They're not countries anymore, they're returning to states, of fundamentally the United States. So these corporations that include your incorporated corporate name inside their filings, inside the Uniform Commercial Code filing system, inside the EDGAR filing system, which is inside the Securities Exchange Commission in Washington, a place that doesn't actually really exist. It's a virtual reality state, and in there you are defined as a utility transmitting account, and that's quite an accurate, if somewhat awful, definition when you think about what it is that you actually are in relation to a matrix such as the World Stock Exchange, for example. You are the stock on the stock exchange, and every single decision that you make in your life then determines what happens tomorrow on the stock exchange. Now, we've been led to believe that we have got freedom and freedom of choice, when in fact there's nothing really much to choose from apart from pick your poison. So that doesn't matter whether it's politics, a religious belief, or our food, our water supplies. It's come to the point where we have allowed our responsibilities to be undertaken supposedly by a structure that is separate from us. Not only is it separate from us, it's separate. It's separating us into divided parts, such as the FTSE index, for example, where your share of the planet and its resources are split into commodities and sold and bought on the stock exchange every day. Now, that represents your share of the planet and its resources. So where is your dividends for that? The commercialisation, or capitalism if you like, of your share of this planet and its resources that were supposed to have been held in trust by a trust that was created under Pope Boniface in 1300 and something. Now, the idea was that obviously we, the goyim, which is what they would like to refer to us as, don't really know what's going on. So how can we possibly be responsible for administering our share of this planet and its resources? Well, we can see what kind of management we've had, let's say, to date, and anybody can do a better job than what we're seeing the so-called government doing in the name of you. They're using your name. They're taken your given name, turned it into a capitalised account, and they've been using it to trade with in and out of the stock exchange. So when you have a clear understanding or overstanding or understanding, however you want to define this is up to you, in the matter that has been conducted in your name, which is nothing short of money laundering, then our energy laundering and slavery, operating a slavery system would possibly be a better definition. However, we're trying to get people to a point where you realise that you only start to encounter problems when we define things. And for a lot of people, we've allowed ourselves to have our definitions projected onto us, so that we've got a common collective belief in certain things, such as pieces of paper. If you have enough pieces of paper, then you can buy the right of use or exchange those pieces of paper for another piece of paper that gives you the right of use, so you think, to a property, for your right to shelter, for example. Now, these are your universal rights that are now being considered a commodity, something to make profit from, something to parasite on for every single move that you make in your existence. So you've got to take a step back and look at what it is that you're actually supporting. And when you do that, you start to remove all of the predetermined definitions that you bought along the way, and say, right, okay, I don't really know, I don't want to define myself as a Vatican debt slave anymore, so I'm going to stop using the name. What can I do in order for me to accomplish that? Well, first of all, you can shut down that part in your mind that tells you otherwise, that part that is attached to our ego, or whatever it is that makes us frequently volunteer ourselves up to be some kind of sacrificial thing to hang upon a cross and to make profit from it. And this is what we're doing all the time, and we're offering ourselves that this can't be done without our granting the consent. And yes, it's done in an underhand way in the video that we touched on before, but fundamentally it's still us that's saying yes to it. So you say no, thank you very much, I haven't got anything to contract with you with. And it's as simple as that. You haven't got anything to contract with them with, and the thing that they want you to use to contract with them with would mean that you are being coerced into committing fraud. So a policeman, for example, standing there asking you to identify yourself, or to enforce an act or an obligation of performance upon you where you haven't got a contract with the corporation, that is trying to imply that you should be following their codification of what is generally known now and commonly accepted as law. It's not law. Now, the law is, as most of you know, do no harm and don't commit fraud in a contract. Now, the fraud that you're committing in the contract is your divine contract, if you like, your divine agreement with universal law that flows through you. It's like the heart cell, for example, coming along and forcing its belief on the eye cell and saying, I'm a heart cell, and I believe you should be too. If that was possible in universal law, then you would just be a pile of heart cells. You probably wouldn't even exist, because imagine the heart cell suddenly not knowing what to believe, and it had had its power of belief removed from it, so it believed in nothing. And so it became nothing. It didn't have the power of creation, because the power of creation came from its belief in what it came here to be. So that's the place where we're standing, saying, look, I'm not going to come and enforce my beliefs on you. I'm going to behave as universal law does, and resonates with every part of itself. I might not like it, I might not share that belief, but at the same time, I'm not going to need the heart cell or the eye cell or the man standing next to me or the woman standing next to me. I'm not going to need them to validate what it is that I believe, and in return I'm not going to come along and validate, judge whether they are saying something that, or being or doing, or something that is obviously, as long as it's not causing me or them or anybody else any harm. So it comes down to the definition of harm. So what is considered harm? Well, right now, I can illegally come and harm you. I can set up a private corporation, and I can make a piece of paper, and I can say that you've got a debt to this corporation, and if you don't give me 10,000 pieces of these papers that you haven't got, then I'm going to come and steal your actual property. I'm going to come and remove your right of use for something which, lawfully, it's impossible for me to do that. Now, debt and money is under civil. You can't cross the line into criminal, because it doesn't exist. it's impossible for a private individual to be in debt, first of all, and second of all, it's impossible for a private individual to be involved in civil procedure, because civil procedure belongs in commerce. And if the man or woman is in the private and not operating in commerce, then there's a different set of rules to abide to, which is simply the law. So as long as you don't step into the role of the debtor by using the debt slave name, you keep yourself in alignment with your contract, with your divine self, your divine trust, and you're trusting in universal law. So universal law community trust is a collective of people who trust in universal law. We touched on this before. And just to bring it all into a picture of some kind of definition that gives you a place of standing, that removes and rebuts all inferior presumptions about who you are. First of all, you never made the presumption about yourself. So if you don't make that presumption about yourself, you simply, the truthful answer is when somebody says to you, who are you? You don't know who you are. You don't know where you're from. You don't know what you're doing here. You know, everything's hearsay from the point where you were, somebody came along and said that this is your name, and you belong to some kind of community or tribe, or in this case corporation. So you have got an opportunity to step to a point where now you know that the truthful answer is, I really don't know. At that point, I'm looking for that. All I know is that I cannot take somebody else's name and use it without their consent. And I haven't got the consent of Crown Corporation to use that name. Now, if you can give me a copy of the right of use for me, a license, for example, to use that name, then I'll use it, but I'll use it with all of my rights reserved, because I'll assign the right of use that you assign to me unto my trust. I'll reassign that to Minister EMOVEN, and it'll be Minister EMOVEN that is accepting service in all matters regarding that particular name, that particular title. I'm still going to reserve my rights. So Minister EMOVEN stands as in universal law. When you use Minister EMOVEN inside call it a court but it's not by any lawful definition, that's for sure. You go into these buildings where these people are trying to rubber stamp terrorism really into people's lives and call it law, and you say, I'm Minister EMOVEN and I'm claiming the jurisdiction of the court under universal law. I am a minister of the Universal Life Church, and the congregation really is now in the realms of universal law, and we're taking the jurisdiction of it into universal law. Now, right at that point now, what is the jurisdiction of universal law? Is somebody trying to commit fraud in a contract and cause harm with it? Yes, to both of those things. So immediately what you've done is you've flipped the so-called defendant, your debt slave name's been used as the defendant, and you've turned that into a claimant, because you have got the jurisdiction now under universal law away from them, because obviously universal law is before anything. Because and if people say, and they said, oh, universal law doesn't exist. Well, that's okay. If you believe that, then how can I be standing here speaking to you if universal law doesn't exist? Whatever that thing is that makes you stand there and tell me in your universal law state, denying yourself that you are blinking and breathing and universal law doesn't exist, then you in no way, shape or form can you be considered to have the capacity of awareness that is required to judge another who has that level of comprehension. So by their own testimony, they've it's not that you have got the higher authority, but there is no higher authority. You are the author of you, aren't you? So some of the people who I've interacted with this before, who work for the, let's say, opposition, they were saying to me, you are debt slave, whatever. It doesn't matter, there have been many names. You are debt slave this. And I said, well, have you got any evidence of that? And they said, no. And I said, well, then you're just assuming. What evidence have you seen? And this guy turned around and he said, no, you are assuming that you're not. And I laughed and I said, look, I can't assume what I'm not. I can only assume what I am. And it's when I assume it, that's a claim. I'm saying that I am that thing that I say that I am. But I'm saying that I'm not that thing that you want me to say that I am. So it's therefore you that is assuming that I am that thing. Now, it's a lot of people have said, you know, can't you make it really clear and all of this? It's very clear, but the way, because it's just one thing through it, that's not my name, I cannot use it, and I'll be prosecuted if I use that name. And those are all that you don't even actually have to say anything anyway, because you would just present the documents if you didn't feel confident enough about presenting yourself as Minister EMOVEN yet. And that's okay, you just need to get a little bit of practice, because there's nothing clever about ministering yourself. You just look at everything in a very in a perspective of awareness that it's only you create it. If you don't go into that role and you take another role, then a whole different arena opens up, because they need to claim your jurisdiction of your mind, and they can't, because you've already given it back to yourself, and you said, look, this incapacitated mind that I used to come along and demonstrate, it's now not there anymore, which means that I can't express the or imply the consent to be granted to you for me to need to be governed as a legal minor, because I simply am not. I know what's going on, and I've retired from crediting that account name, and I'm here to find out who is trying to cause controversy and attach that controversy to me. And so going back then to somebody taking a name and fixing a contract with it, that is on all levels, all the way down to the birth certificate. Your parents had no right to take a name and commit it to a contract without your consent. So when you say somebody took that name and created a contract, fixed a contract with it and then said it was me, is that's the one truth that you only need to know that. It's not about coming and doing many hours in minister's training and tell us what to do. It's simply that if you do not, now you know that you can't use that name and that somebody can't enter into a contract with you, apply that knowing, just that one thing, to everything. You can't have applied for the bank loan that they've laundered your accounts through. That you can't apply for the driving licence. You can't apply to pay tax. You can't apply because you're knowingly then committing copyright theft, and you wouldn't want to be doing that, because obviously that takes you back into the realms of legal systems. And really, what we're actually doing is we're saying, look, I'm just going to come along and sacrifice my soul, and I'm going to do it willingly, and I'm giving you the rights to do that to me. So in a way, and in a wicked way, they've not actually done anything wrong, because you allowed them to do it. You gave them your consent. So step one, obviously, is assigning your consent. It's not away from yourself. It's away from a system that would imply that you have given it to them and back into your own hands. So the same thing applies when you're, for example, transferring the title, TR1 document. The right of use is still your right of use, but now it's liability free. You've got a different piece of paper that you would sell or will or buy or rent from, and your the title can remain in that name, because the liabilities belong to the name. It's only us that are bringing it to life when we go in there and say, hey, yeah, you know that bed thing there, it's mine. It's fraud, it's not yours. And so hopefully as we go along, people will be able to get that picture in their head and then go, okay, it's not mine, the debt's not mine, the liabilities are not mine, but in the same token, because the title's not mine, and now I know I don't need a title. And if I'm going to have a title, I'll christen myself, thank you.